afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session of EIPA in conversation with entitled CAF and Supreme Audit Institutions Enhancing Integrity in Public Sector. My name is Julia Bayer-Bader. I'm a communications manager at EIPA, and I'm pleased to welcome you as our guests today, as our participants for this session. EIPA in conversation with is a format of EIPA that happens regularly once a month, normally Thursdays, and it's about lunchtime. So we have a lunch discussion today. And I'm pleased to welcome my guests and our distinguished speakers today, who will be providing a bit more detail and insights into how can we support, or how can the CAF, or Common Assessment Framework, support the audit institutions in their challenges or to overcome their budgetary and operational challenges. And having said this, I'm pleased to welcome today our three speakers. First of all, Gracia Vara-Arribas, the head of European CAF Resource Center at EIPA. Gracia herself is a lawyer. She's focusing on the multi-level governance, better regulations, and the evaluation of public policies and projects, with a special focus also on strategic public procurement, law, and practice. So welcome, Gracia, today for this discussion. Our next speaker is Mike Burnett, who is a public sector audit expert himself. He's a member of the Solihull Borough Council Audit Committee, and he is a former EIPA expert on and project manager for the EPSA, European Public Sector Award projects. So he has more than 15 years of experience in directing EIPA's international training program in public-private partnership for the European public officials. And I'm very delighted to hear also his thoughts and his takes on the audit and how external auditors need to perform for the future. And last but not least, we have Isabelle Verschuren. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Isabelle is coming from Belgium. So she is a civil servant at the Belgium Federal Public Service Policy and Support. And she is at the same time also our CAF national correspondent from Belgium. So she's a practitioner. So she will hopefully tell us today a bit more about how CAF can be implemented in practice in the public sector. And in general, Isabelle leads and accompanies organizations through transformation by coaching and giving support to managers, building strategies, etc., etc. So I'm sure that Isabelle has also a lot of practical hints and tips, so to say, for us today. Without further ado and not taking much of the time, I would like to move to the discussion itself. So we're planning to have another 35 minutes of a discussion with the speakers. I prepared some of the questions for them, so they set a bit the scene, and then we will have the last 15 minutes time for the discussion with the audience. So dear participants, please feel free also to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will pick up them later in the discussion to also address this. Without further ado, I'd like to ask my first question, and maybe it goes to Mike Burnett as well. Maybe you could also outline a bit in general why external audit matters to trust in government. What does it mean? And why it is important. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julia. The most important thing is to say that there are diverse approaches to external audit across the EU. And that's why I would, as a follow-up to this meeting, I would strongly recommend that you have a look at a publication called Public Audit in the EU from 2019, an EU publication which shows the diversity of approaches across the EU. So before saying anything else, I would like to recommend that publication to you, and we will send you the link at a later stage. Fundamentally, external audit matters to trust in government because the public sector matters, and because the public sector is about delivering services to citizens. And the reason why external audit matters more and more at the moment is because of the pressures that public sector bodies are under. But budgetary pressures, pressures to meet citizens' expectations of public services, including increasingly issues of equity amongst citizens in access to services and the promotion of climate security. The second thing is that even before COVID, which has clearly shaken up the challenges for the public sector, there was a need for the public sector to face three ways. As the OECD has pointed out, they need to show strategic foresight, looking at the issues that are coming down the tracks, dealing with the immediate pressures, including ones which are subject to rapid change and where there are crises. And the speed of change is also increasing. As I said, COVID has multiplied this by changing priorities and spending patterns and challenges for security of supply, and particularly changes to the control environment. And so an audit matters because what auditors can do is to confirm that on an evidence basis, public sector bodies are providing the services that citizens want, and therefore promoting trust in that way. And it's at a time when, as we know, all institutions, including the public sector, are being increasingly challenged. And there are many other players who are important, including, as we'll hear from Isabel, internal auditors. But the particular role of external auditors is that they have a remit to audit good governance. They have the necessary skills, although, as we'll see, these skills need to broaden. They have the independence from all other arms of government, and they have the reporting powers. So that fundamentally is why external audit is important to trusting government.
Thank you very much, Mike, for this good introduction that set the scene. I will jump directly to Isabel. Also, let's say going further into the question. Okay, how can or what can what external auditors need to do in order to be able to identify these priorities that they need to tackle, and how can this be conducted in practice? So how they need to conduct this audit in practice. Thank you. You're muted. Wait. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Julia. So, and thank you, Michael, for this good introduction about external audit. In Belgium, in fact, we are working together. So, in fact, external auditor with internal auditor and also with internal control. And in fact, it's really important, the collaboration and share of the document, because in fact, when the internal audit make report, it's quite important to follow the recommendation and in Belgium, it's the internal control. And if we have an external audit, so in fact, for example, the Court of Auditor is our external audit because it's the Parliament who has the report and make the report. In fact, it's really important, the single audit. In fact, that also the unit, the operation unit who has been audited, in fact, we are working together. So in fact, we are not covering the same area and the same scope. And so in fact, we give also our report of internal audit to the external audit, because I think it's quite important to work together. And in the challenge for internal audit is the autonomy and also the responsibility, because for example, in Belgium, in the social security, the internal audit is in position right at the top. So in fact, they advise also the management. And at the federal audit, we have now a shared internal audit. And we have also a committee, an internal audit committee. And the internal audit committee give advice to the federal government. And I think that's quite important, the structure of the internal audit, external audit, and internal audit. But in fact, what is important, auditors are listening. They are also watching, analyze, and check if in fact the process are okay and if all the risks are managed. And I think that's quite interesting, because in Belgium, it's the internal control function who make a self-assessment report. Then in fact, the internal audit make an audit plan based on the risk assessed by the internal audit. And then in fact, the external audit came, for example, for European project or for different, with a different objective. But I think the collaboration is quite important.
Thank you very much. And then I think it's a good timing also to include Gracia into this conversation. So we've heard two perspectives already now, and then maybe a very broad and generic question to you as well. So what challenges does this bring to, and how can CAF help the auditors to overcome those challenges that are there in the modern societies at the moment?
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. Indeed, I think there is no question that the audit function has become really essential, even more, if possible, due to these demanding times in the post-COVID era. They have the role to promote transparency and to present the financial reporting in an accurate manner that encourages the trust of the citizens in government, as Michael Burnett has already mentioned. So they are providing a service to the citizens that becomes essential. And it goes very much, the quality of the services they are providing becomes very much linked to the quality of the organization of these audit institutions. So there is an important role of the audit institutions all over Europe to really reinforce this trust of the citizens in the government. And for that, we think that following total quality management tools becomes essential for these organizations. And therefore, we have had already experiences there. We can talk about that later. But we really think that CAF could really serve as an interesting tool to this type of organizations and really support the staff in these organizations, the internal and external auditors in their important challenges.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree with Gracia, because in fact, what is important is that the public administration work well and is customers focused. So in fact, with the CAF, so in fact, it's a quality model with 9 criteria. In fact, the citizen are at the center of the model. And in fact, the CAF is a self-assessment tool, and it's also to provide good communication within the administration and also with the citizen, because in fact we are public for we are an administration for the public and to the public, and that's really important. So in fact what we have do in fact in Belgium, the internal federal services has map in fact 15 domain in fact to put in place the audit plan. So in fact we check first in fact the goal, what are the target, what is the strategic plan of the public administration. Then in fact we assess in fact the risk, what are the risks in fact not to achieve this objective. Then in fact what are the process management. Then in fact which indicator can we use to report to the management level, but also to the political level. Then in fact it's really important stakeholders management, and also for the CAF in fact we have a criteria criteria 4 with resources and partnership is really great and really important in the public sector. Then in fact we have the organizational structure, organizational culture, and in fact CAF is a tool also to implement and to integrate quality in the culture of the administration, because in fact we have the Plan, Do, Check, Act, and in fact we always check in fact where is the maturity of our organization. We have only planned something or we have only do something, but we must always in fact justify with some document. In fact, it's like we with the CAF, in fact, we give the opportunity to all the personnel working in the administration to be a small internal auditor, and also to come with objective, with facts to prove where we are. Then in fact integrity, and I think this CAF in conversation was also focused on integrity, because integrity is really important for the image of the public service and also the trust in the public administration. Then you have business continuity plan, and we have seen that during the COVID crisis that was quite critical. In Belgium, some administration has a business continuity plan, and for them COVID was quite easy, and in one day and some hours everything was okay. But for other public administration it was not the case, and we see that when you have a big change, such as Mike has suggested, climate change, but also the war, electricity and so on, in fact it's really important to prepare the administration to face this big challenge. Then you have ICT, and you have also cyber security. In Belgium, in fact, we have a shared internal audit, and for some topics, in fact, we outsource. So, for example, about IT, cyber security, we have not always, in fact, the skills internal, so we outsource. Then project management, and project management is really a key for the public administration, because before, in fact, we were not always working as a project, and a project is really important, in fact, to have a beginning, but also the end, and then assess, in fact, evaluate the result of the project. Then communication and information, and in fact, in the public administration, we are not so good selling what we are doing. So in fact, marketing and public marketing is really important. So Julia, I think we need you. Then facility management, and here, for example, we have a European project with other member states, and I think more and more we must do interoperability. So different public administration working together to put all the effort together and to build synergy, to have economic of scales, but also to learn, because I think public administration must learn and develop new services, new idea, and that's really important. Then you have human resources, and financial management. So at the beginning in Belgium, in fact, the internal audit was really focused on financial management. We have also had a lot of reform with the budget, with the accountability, with the finance. But now, in fact, the internal audit is more operational and more performance audit.
Thank you. Gracia, do you want to add something? Please
Yes,
go ahead.
I was very pleased to listen to Isabel and to see all the things they are developing in Belgium. I think it's of major importance, this link we are establishing between the need to have a good audit institutions and the service that CAF can provide. And I'm happy to listen that in Belgium you are implementing CAF very thoroughly. At EIPA, we did have some implementation of CAF with different supreme audit institutions. And as you know, supreme audit institutions throughout Europe, they play an essential role, but they have a very different format, resources, amount of staff working in them throughout the countries. If you look at the comparative maps, they are really different in the way they handle their mandate and the way they handle the organization as such. So several CAF implementations were coached from our team in the European CAF Resource Center at EIPA. But just to highlight one case, because of the importance of the institution, years ago, the European Court of Auditors implemented CAF with the assistance of the European CAF Resource Center. And we have to look at the leadership that was so strong at that point. The reason for searching on how to self-assess the organization for the European Court of Auditors at the time was that they were having the mandate to have this peer review, internal peer review, but they were also getting requests from the European Parliament and from the Council to conduct this peer review to evaluate their performance and to see how the organization, the institution could improve. So this leadership element is something that became really essential because the time lapse to implement CAF was very short. The organization is pretty big with very varied type of staff working in it. So there was the need to compile and to motivate all the staff to really collaborate. Because with the CAF instrument, it's clear that the results the organization will be finally obtaining via the citizens and the society will very much depend on the role played by the leaders, the planning they will have on their future strategy, how they will manage their human resources, and what type of processes they will establish. But also how they care about their partners. So also the relations in this case with the other European institutions. Out of that exercise, there was the construction of an action plan with 2 years term and 5 years terms. And for us as the European CAF Resource Center was very pleasant to see that after the implementation of these action plans, there was this new strategy for the European Court of Auditors for the period 2013-2017. So it really helped the organization to establish a new strategy focusing on the weak points and the areas of improvement, and really checking that the action plan was really implemented, check again, and start with the cycle of the CAF model. So again, here another example that the audit institutions implementing CAF have really seen results after it. That's what I wanted to add.
Mm-hmm. In Belgium also, what is quite interesting, in fact, the public administration who has applied the CAF, in fact, we focus also on the strengths, because audit, they focus on the weaknesses and the area of improvement. But I think with the CAF, I think it's also quite important to motivate and to be quite fair about the result we have achieved, because I think it's also quite good, in fact, to have publicity about what is working well in the administration and about also the result we have achieved for the society, for the customer. And I think that's quite important. Also in Belgium, when an administration has already applied the CAF, in fact, all the documents are centralized. And when you have an audit, in fact, the administration give the access to all the documents. So I think it's also quite easy for the internal auditor or the external auditor to have a public administration having already used the CAF, because all the documents are centralized. And so it was easy for them, in fact, to have access to some documentation because everything was there. And then, in fact, it's also, for example, how a risk officer, they use, in fact, normally they are also involved in the CAF self-assessment group, because in fact it's people coming from all the administration. They talk about really operational and detail, and how a CAF officer are quite happy when they are in a self-assessment group, because in fact they have then a very detailed identify the risk, how they can mitigate the risk, how they can manage the risk, and how can they escalate the risk. And I think that's also a good opportunity, in fact, to use also the common assessment framework as a tool to improve the administration, to improve the culture, and also to have already this mindset. Plan, do, check, act. And then, in fact, you have the external audit of internal audit about check. And then, in fact, how can you follow the recommendation and put it in place?
Thank you very much. Gracia, Mike, do you want to add anything? We also have already received a question in the Q&A. I will pose it later. If there is any follow-up comments, reactions at the moment, please go ahead.
I think there's one or two things that underline what Gracia and Isabel have said. Firstly, this idea that of the European Court of Auditors to have a 5-year plan and an annual plan is something that they've continued with. The second thing to say is that this plan highlights that auditing can't any longer just be about financial audit. It needs to be about performance and operational audit. And what that underlines, and particularly in some of the areas that Isabel mentioned, cyber security and ICT, the need for audit teams to be multi-skilled and for auditors to broaden their skills. Another thing that is where I would pick up on what Isabel said is that it's a traditional parody of auditors that they turn up after the car crash. That's not in accordance with what auditors need to do now. They need to be involved in assessing at the planning phase of major projects, the design of systems, the planning and preparation phase of major procurements. They need to, it's not for auditors to make decisions about how budgets should be allocated or what priorities should be, but they need to audit the process by which these budgets and priorities are set to make sure that they are processes which are consistent with citizens' priorities and the ability of the entity to sustain what it plans to do, sustain in the sense of allocate the resources to deliver it over time. Because in the end, people think of budgeting as a dry technical process, but it isn't. Budgeting is where a public administration says, these are our priorities, and this is what we're going to spend the money on to deliver those priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed,
I can
just to add, sorry, Isabel, just to add that indeed, and this reflects very much exactly the results of the action plan executed at the European Court of Auditors, just to follow with the same example, because the reform they did immediately after this action plan was set, they established 4 principles in which they would focus all the attention, and of course that means also the staff efforts, and would be to give an agile response to all the changing environment that the European Court of Auditors was facing, to direct resources in a flexible manner to the different audit tasks, and then they were including the growing importance of performance audit, delivery products timely, which by the way, since then the European Court of Auditors has been very timely increasing their good performance when it comes to this priority, and better communication, the role and the work of the court, which again links with what Isabel says, that public administration sometimes are not that good in selling their own good products. So these 4 principles were in fact in the main line of the implementation of the action plan by the court at that time.
And what is quite also interesting with the CAF, the Common Assessment Framework, in fact, we have also made the link for the 9 criteria with the SDG, donc in fact, the sustainable goal. And I think that's also quite important, in fact, to have a higher of a bigger view, an overview of where we would like, in fact, to go, to have a vision. And then, in fact, it's only an attention. So in Belgium, sometimes, in fact, the external auditor or the internal auditor make a lot of recommendations, but they are not so really practical. So they are not so precise. So in fact, it's also quite important to be also realistic, because in fact, you can write formulate a recommendation, but then if the administration has not the power, has not the resources to put it in place, it's une lettre morte. So that's a pity, I think. And then in Belgium, sometimes, in fact, we are now making really wonderful strategic plan, but then, in fact, we don't link the strategic plan with the budget. And then we have wonderful idea, but we have not the resources to put it in place. So in fact, for the moment, we try, in fact, to reconnect and to integrate more, in fact, the strategic plan with the budget. Because if we have no budget and we have no the resources and we have no the human resources, we have no the engine and the motor to put it in place.
Moving on to some of the things that auditors need to do to conduct effective audits, one of the most important things is to assess their past experience with the entity. What is their attitude to the auditors? Do they implement recommendations in a timely and appropriate way, or come up with good justifications as to why they can't or shouldn't? Secondly, one of the most important judgments of external auditors is, as Isabel pointed out, what is the independence and expertise and resourcing of internal audit. If you have a strong, independent, well-skilled internal audit function, that gives an important element of confidence to external auditors. A third element is that external auditors also need to assess the role and effectiveness of audit scrutiny bodies. Now, the committee to which I belong is at Solihull Borough Council, which is a metropolitan area of about 250,000 people. Our job is to make sure that the internal auditors focus on priorities, interact well with management, and to make sure that the external auditors also come up with a credible plan and implement it. Another thing that's increasingly important for external audit is to be real time. In other words, they need direct access to the systems of the audited entity. Thus, for example, the Deputy Internal Audit Manager in Solihull actively monitors the implementation of a new cloud system. And he doesn't have to write a report, he can actually monitor it in real time. And also, in the case of major third-party contracts, access to the systems of key suppliers, so that if there are any questions about the credibility of the information on performance that's been supplied to the audited body, then they have the means to check it. Isabel, I also agree with you that audit has to move away from being only a function that criticises what's gone wrong. They should also point out positive lessons. What is the authority doing right? And I think in terms of skills, there's an importance of shifting from data collection, which is now easier with data analytics and data extraction tools, to the interpretation of data. So the auditors can spend more time on reflecting on what they find, and they don't have to spend so much time actually extracting it. So those are some of the things which are, in my experience, important things for the effective conduct of audits.
And I think also what is quite important, in fact, it's the transversal. So, for example, in Belgium, we have a shared internal audit office. And then, in fact, we have also transversal objective. And now, in fact, we are making working group, in fact, to learn from each others and follow the recommendation together. And what is also quite important, in fact, it's for the internal audit to have intervision. So in fact, internal auditors are not alone. So I think that can be also quite interesting to have people being internal auditor, but in another country, and share and perhaps also learn from each other. So that can be an added value. And then we have also the public administration who has the label PEF. So in fact, they are certified, they follow the good procedure of the CAF. And in fact, we have an arrangement with the European Commission. So in fact, it's a public administration has the label PEF. In fact, the internal audit, in fact, believe in this administration, and the audit is a little lighter. So it's also a bonus, in fact, to use the CAF for both, because it's a win-win situation. And in Belgium, we have also follow-up audit. So in fact, we have had now an audit about cyber security, and in 2 years, we will have a follow-up audit to see if the situation has changed.
All right, thank you very much for the interventions. I don't want to disrupt this discussion. I think it fits very nicely together. I think we're good in the time to move towards the questions from the audience. As I already mentioned, there is one in the chat, but I would like to encourage also the participants to ask your questions in the Q&A, or if you want, you can also put them in the chat. We'll try to fish them out. But the question I have so far is addressed to Mike. logic, and I'll read it out loud for everyone and for you as well. So following the logic that both external audit and CAF follow, the principles of efficiency and effectiveness of all the organizational levels. So there are like 9 CAF criteria and 28 sub-criteria, and the SMART principles as well. Do you check the CAF action plan and or improvement report before or during the external audit? So basically, when is the appropriate timing to check this? And if so, do you find this added value, yes or no? Or would you consider this a useful approach, yes or no?
Well, thanks for your question, Tehana. It's an important question because, yes, what it underlines is that auditors, when they are selecting their priorities, and they do have to select priorities because they don't have unlimited resources, and they have to focus on the things which, if they go wrong, are going to have the most serious consequences or are most likely to go wrong. And the CAF action plan and improvement report do indeed form a very important part of that data collection, as indeed do other experiences of peer group bodies like the OECD Auditors Alliance, EuroSci, the European Association of Supreme Audit Institutions, InterSci, their international equivalent, and bodies within the EU, such as OLAF. So, yes, the answer is it most definitely should form part at the planning stage of where the auditors are determining their priorities, of fixing those priorities.
In Belgium also, we recommend, in fact, to publicize, in fact, the internal audit report. So, in fact, some of them are public, some of them are not public, but I think it's also a good opportunity, in fact, to translate in a citizen vocabulary, in fact, an audit report, because I think it's also a message to the citizens how the public money is used and what is the added value of the public services. Even sometimes, in fact, the weaknesses are well stressed, but I think also the good practice, because, for example, during the COVID crisis, the public administration were quite solid. In fact, they adapt quite rapidly to all the changing, and the priority are changing, and we have adapt all the time. And I think we have also a resilience administration, and I think that's also a very positive message to the citizens.
And if I may add, I think what is also very important is that this is a continuous exercise aiming to improve the organization, trying to achieve excellence. And it gives the opportunity to set up the priorities, to convert those priorities in action plans, and then the auditor will be checking that, but this will come back again in the next auditing round. So it's a continuous process. It's not that you finish with once and forever. You will keep on going, and you can use, as they were saying, the information is there. You can use the past action plan to improve the upcoming one, and the auditors will be able to be checking all these documents in an open manner.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any follow-up questions, or I don't see any questions in the chat. So once again, this is an encouragement for our audience to put their questions. In my moderator role today, I'll, let's say, take I will ask them some of the questions myself. I mean, both Isabel and Mike were already mentioning this, that also, let's say, one of the ways how audit can be changing is by let's say, as stressing also not only the weaknesses, but also the strengths of the institution that was audited. But maybe you could elaborate a bit more on the role of the external audits that they can in general play in the process of ensuring the effective planning and implementation of the services. And then maybe also connected to this side question is like, where are the boundaries for this role? So what can audit be, should not be, based also on your experience? So let's say focusing on this past experience, what do you think how it should be in the future?
I mean, the first thing to say is that we have been talking a lot about what external and internal auditors should do. But it's worth saying that nobody is pretending that any of this is easy. One of the real challenges for auditors is the broad scope of their objectives. They have to make sure that what the authority does is legal, what it does secures value for money, does it detect fraud and corruption, do the services meet citizens' priorities, and do the policy decisions and their implementation have the appropriate impact. Nobody is pretending that any of this is easy, particularly in the context of the greater availability of data and the skills needed to understand policy issues. In fact, one question that I have reflected on is whether or not, given the skills needed by auditors, whether maybe we should be thinking about the idea of sector specialization for auditors. In other words, auditors, to make a better, more efficient use of their resources, become specialists in certain areas. So, for example, an audit institution has its specialists in health and social care, in justice and law and order, in the environment, for example. The other important thing is that is the internal culture and processes of audit bodies. In other words, firstly, there needs to be effective succession planning, so that if somebody leaves, the skills don't automatically disappear, and that there is skills update. There's something a little bit more subtle and more important. It's about maintaining a challenge culture. But let's put it this way. This is more a challenge in the private sector audit in which I grew up. But there were when I was a junior auditor, one or two of the audit managers made it clear that if there was a difference of opinion between the auditors and the audited body, the way to deal with it was to find an imaginative way of agreeing with what the audited body said. Now, in a context of the private sector, that's more of an issue than the public sector. But if people who are developing their skills in audit think that they're not going to be rewarded by recognition or promotion if they continue to challenge audited bodies, then they're going to, the majority of them, if they don't leave the organisation, will adopt a non-challenge culture. And auditors must challenge. Coming back to the questions of planning, we talked about platforms for data sharing and enhancing sharing of experiences. And also regulatory bodies have an important. It's fundamental to the ability of auditors to demonstrate their independence, is that the audited body does not have the power of appointment and reappointment, because if they do, then what will happen is that the auditors will be at risk of wanting to, let me use the word, appease clients, appease audited bodies, so that they'll get reappointed. So, so platforms for data sharing, the Eurosci Contact Committee is one example. Sharing experiences through the platforms that I mentioned earlier, and the idea that audit performance should not depend on what the audited body says, but perhaps on independent peer audit. So, for example, that if you wanted to assess the independence of a supreme audit institution, the appropriate way to do it would be for it to be done through a peer review by supreme audit institutions from other European countries. I was going to say EU member states, but that's a sensitive issue with me.
I think also two other skills who are quite important for an internal auditor is consultation. In Belgium, consultation is really, really important. Consultation with the auditee, but also with the political body, in order to, and also in fact to enlarge in fact the audit to citizen experience the problem the citizen have with the administration. And then, so it's a consultation and collaboration. Collaboration, such as Mike has said, with other internal audit from other member states, but also perhaps with external auditor. And in order to be more objective and also to learn, because I think every internal audit has its method of working. There are norms, there are principles, but then it's the heart of auditing. And I think it's really hard sometimes, because in fact you must be very diplomatic, you must be searching information, and then in fact create and invent a new way of working. So I think that's also quite important. Because in fact,
sorry, yeah.
Well,
I was just going to say, by all means, it's absolutely right that there needs to be consultation and listening to the Parliament, to NGOs, to citizens. But in the end, auditors must decide what they choose to audit, but having listened and consulted with those groups that Isabel mentioned.
Because I think it's also a guarantee to have a good administration. And I think that's the goal that we would like, in fact, to achieve, to have a very good organization and good public services with a great manager.
So I think we have seen in these different discussions that at the end, the 9 criteria of the model CAF embrace all the challenges we have been talking about. And what the model will do is, if your organization is thinking of evaluating your own performance vis-a-vis your audit works, is that you will have the methodology to organize all these different elements and challenges we have been talking about in a very coherent way and getting results out of it, really being able to implement an action plan that leads towards the improvement. So I think the link in this conversation has become very clear, and for all the attendees that perhaps did not know about the model and all the challenges of both external and internal auditors, we have established this link very clear. So I'm satisfied.
Thanks very much, Grace. And of course, I would like to follow up on what you just said. And also as a communications manager at EIPA, I would like to pay attention of the participants that we will be having also a course happening in November, 23 to 25 November on CAF course. So if you are interested in learning more about the course, about the CAF in general, and if you would like to attend this, so you can have a look at the link that is posted now in the chat, and consider maybe that would be some of the areas where you could learn something new and book yourself a course. Having said this as well, I would like to thank our speakers. We are perfectly in time. I'd love to continue this discussion maybe at some later point during another EIPA conversation. We will come back to this. From my side, a huge thank you for Gracia, Mike, and Isabel for giving this practical insight, for giving a bit of future perspective, but also what is needed right now. I take for myself as well things like collaboration, consultation, transparency, integrity, and of course also learning, a lot of learning as the key words for this discussion. I'd like also to pay attention of the audience that there will be following discussions coming up. So we have EIPA conversation on a monthly basis, but we do also some other public discussions and events. So again, in the chat, you will be able to see a direct link to EIPA events where you can subscribe to public activities that we are organizing. And we would be also happy to welcome you once again at our event. With this, thank you very much. We will be able to provide this recording to all the participants. And I guess I wish you a pleasure afternoon and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.